afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. We know the stats. Out of every 3 African-American children, 2 of them will grow up without their dad. Children absent their fathers are more likely to be poor, use drugs, and engage in criminal behavior. But what about the one who grows up with his or her father? Today, we focus on the positive with the authors of the book Dare to be Extraordinary, a collection of positive life lessons from African-American fathers. Stay tuned for Focus on Fatherhood right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Now, the primary goal of Another View is to give you, our audience, another view of the African-American community. Today, we focus on one of the most critical issues facing the Black community, African-American fatherhood. Contrary to media reports and sadly popular belief, there are Black men in our community who are caring, loving dads who provide for their family and instill pride in their children. Joining me to celebrate the positive in African American fathers are Leslie Gordon and William Middlebrooks, authors of Dare to be Extraordinary, a collection of positive life lessons from African American fathers. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hi, Barbara. Just great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Bill, are you with us
Barbara.
too? Good to hear from you all. And for those of you who are streaming us on computer or online, I am in studio by myself because Bill and Leslie are joining me by phone today. I love this book because it does focus on the positive. I wonder what was the motivation for the two of you to write it. And let me start with you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Barbara, for the opportunity, and I don't think you could have said it any better. Leslie and I wanted to be a part of something that began a new positive dialogue about the role of African-American men as engaged, loving fathers. And the normal discourse about African-American men, primarily as fathers, has not been positive. Mm-hmm. And we knew from personal examples and observations that there are, in fact, a great number of African-American men who every day step up to the role and the challenge and the responsibility to be a loving and engaged father. And we wanted to be a part of that dialogue. And our overarching goal and objective, Barbara, is we wanted to, what I call, bend the curve. And that curve is we wanted to reduce the number of father-absent homes in our communities. Mm-hmm. And so that's what Leslie and I began about 2 years ago. And I'm pleased to be able to be on the show with you and Leslie to talk about it.
Leslie, let me ask you, since maybe a lot of my listeners have not seen the book yet, tell us about how you put this together. You've got stories from pretty prominent people.
Yeah, it was, as Bill said, it was a really good experience and good journey just working with him. And the reason, Barbara, I decided to get involved is because Bill Middlebrooks is a real, a well-respected business leader and community servant in Detroit, and someone I really respect and admire as a husband and father of 2 sons. And he asked me to develop a book that celebrates and uplifts African-American fathers. So what we did was put together personal stories of 20 men and women, and we are really trying to breathe life into one of today's most compelling social issues, and that's fatherhood in the African-American community, Mm-hmm. Through in-depth discourse, we talked to business leaders, cultural icons, athletes, politicians, activists, doctors, and really some of the best and brightest minds of our time, and gave them the chance to share with a lot of honesty and intellect and wit lessons they learned from their fathers. So we we interviewed a host of people that your listeners might recognize. Russell Simmons is one of the well-known people we talked to. Robin Roberts from Good Morning America, Ambassador Andrew Young, Harold Ford Jr., the former U.S. Congressman, and again, a number of prominent folks, and some that are not on everyone's radar, but have some really compelling stories, and they are truly successful because their fathers pushed them and encouraged them and nurtured them to be really extraordinary men and women.
So, Bill, what would you say to someone who would say, well, of course their fathers, they're successful and their fathers were there, they're rich, they're well known, if it doesn't happen for people who aren't in their socioeconomic stratosphere? How would you respond to that in terms of the life lessons?
Sure. Well, what I would tell you is that we chose what we call famous and not so famous people because our society is enamored with celebrity. And so if we didn't have people like a Robin Roberts or Russell Simmons on here or in the book, people probably wouldn't be interested in reading it, unfortunately. But we have a number of people who, as Leslie said, are not, quote, celebrity, but they are people of substance and significance in their lives. Again, people like a Dr. Thurman Hunt or a Dr. Leo Maitland or an Allen Houston. But here's the key thing, Barbara. What we did is we focused on their relationship and the influence that their fathers had on them and how they put them on a path to lead a significant or an extraordinary life. And when you look at the 20 men and fathers that we profiled in the book, in their stories, they come from a very diverse background, from education. Some didn't even finish high school, to some that have advanced degrees. Some that, again, were very poor, like the Ernest Archer, the father of former Mayor Detroit Dennis Archer, to, again, someone like a John Rogers Sr., who was a judge, went to, obviously, law school, and unfortunately, recently in his 90s, just passed away about a month or so ago. So we've got a wide range, Barbara, of men that, again, all had something in common, regardless of their educational background or their economic status. They had a strong desire and a commitment to step up and be a father to their sons and daughters.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We'd love to hear from our audience about how your father influenced you. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Leslie, I wonder, as you all put the book together, I'm sure you interviewed many, many people. Was there a difference between you and Bill in terms of selecting who ultimately would wind up in here? Because I wonder if a woman's perspective is a little different from a man's perspective.
I think certainly we came from different perspectives. I'm a mom and a wife and, a daughter, and, I think I am looking through an entirely different lens. But Bill and I really worked collaboratively on this. We sat down together several times and went through a list of people we thought would be really compelling, that we could really dig deep and focus on exactly how their dads impacted them. So, I wanted to talk to Robin Roberts, for example, and Bill had a relationship with Andrew Young Jr., Ambassador Andrew Young, and there were some men that I put on the table that I thought were compelling. There were some women that he identified. So it was really a collaborative effort. I certainly have more of a kind of a soft spot for some of the women in the book. For example, Rosalind Brewer, who's a Detroit native. She is the first African-American female CEO of Sam's Club, a division of Walmart, and she's a dynamic woman. And just in talking to her and hearing her story, I always talk about how her father She's the youngest of 5 children, and her father worked 3 jobs, and he was at every dance recital or violin recital or rehearsal or anything that she did that involved her schooling and her education or a performance. He was there, and she was just one of the women in the book that really, her story spoke to me, and it was just very touching, and I appreciated being able to talk to and interview some of the amazing women in the book, including Dr. Velma Scantleberry, who's the first African-American female transplant surgeon. So we've got some dynamos in the book, and I certainly have a passion for the women in the book.
So, Bill, can I get you to share maybe one of the stories that resonated with you to tell the audience about that person's father?
Sure. When Leslie and I had a chance to sit down and talk with, we call it Talk with History, and that was with former UN Ambassador Andrew Young. And, he had a story about his father. His father was a dentist, and he grew up in New Orleans, and, his father, and I'm not saying anything that he didn't share and hasn't said publicly, did not necessarily have a strong, positive view of men in the pulpit when he was coming up. Mm-hmm. And so when Ambassador Young decided that he wanted to go to school at the seminary and become a minister, his father said that he would not, in fact, pay for him to go to seminary school, and he had to do that on his own. So he went off, and I think for the first year, he didn't come back home, but he communicated with both his parents via letters, and that is, of course, what put him on the path to meeting Dr. Martin Luther King, and has essentially allowed people like Leslie and I and you to stand on the shoulders of those that risked their lives and their limbs to give us an opportunity to do the things that we've been able and blessed to do today.
I thought
that was rather interesting.
I noticed that education, in all of the stories that I've read, education seemed to be one of the prevailing themes throughout each story. But I wonder what other themes resonated with you all in terms of what were these fathers doing that allowed their children to become successful?
If I can answer that, I would say, Barbara, that, the overarching theme was their presence. I mean, even the fathers who were not necessarily married to the mothers, they had been divorced, for example, they spent time with their kids. I mean, they were they made sacrifices for those who didn't get a chance to follow their own dreams. For a number of reasons, they did everything within their power to make sure their children were able to realize their dreams. And again, each of the dads pushed, encouraged, and loved their children to the best of their ability, and that's why these men and women became as successful as they are today. So I think the huge theme, in addition to education, was just being there, being present, making sure that his love was felt every single day.
And Bill, do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. In addition to those observations, I think what I came away from the experience and the discussion was that each of these extraordinary men, regardless, again, of whether they finished high school or had advanced degrees, they instilled in their sons and daughters what I call a sense of pride. And when I talk about pride, Barbara, I define the word pride as personal responsibility in delivering excellence. In every one of these men, in the stories, in their lessons, in their presence in the lives of their sons and daughters, stressed to them the importance that they needed to have pride in everything that they did, large and small. And so that, lesson of assuming personal responsibility in delivering excellence was present in all of those 20 men. And so that's one of the things that I really took away from my my conversations with these extraordinary men and women about their fathers.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Join our conversation. We're talking about positiveness today. We're talking about positive African-American fathers who are making a difference in their children's lives. Richard joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Richard. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hi.
I just want to say I haven't read the book yet, and I plan to get it. And I've been married 31 years, and so I have a son and a daughter, and I've been there for my kids, although I'm retired Navy, 24 years in the service.
Mm-hmm.
My thing is this. It's great to hear about the famous people that we as African Americans know and revere. I would like to see that drop down to the level to where people that you really don't even hear about every day. I'm talking about the people that like work in the shipyard, the people that do the positive things for their parents, for their sons, but somehow goes on unnoticed. And I know quite a few. I know quite a few fathers, and some of the kids are there, some of them aren't. But it doesn't matter. They just pick that boot up and they walk with it, and they carry the responsibility of their own. So I guess my thing is, how do we get to recognize the fathers that aren't that well known, other than the ones that's mentioned in the book?
Well, one thing, you just did it, so we thank you for your call, Richard. I'll let you start with Bill to respond.
Sure, Richard, and first, as the father of a current serving Army officer, I thank you for your service. But I would tell you, Richard, if you look at the stories, you got to go beyond the celebrity of the people that we're talking about. You have not heard typically of the fathers of these 20 men. And as I say, some of them were farmers, some of them were factory workers, some of them were, worked in government, positions. And so we did make a conscious effort to recognize those individuals in this book. And you're absolutely correct. It is important that, we have this dialogue and discussion about, African-American men that get up every day like yourself and assume the responsibility and the obligation to be there and be present in the lives of your sons and daughters. And what we've got to do is recognize that, we need to have these kind of discussions about fatherhood, not just one day out of a year in June, but the other 364 days out of the year. And so if you would like to go to our website, which is www.extraordinaryfathers.com, you'll see that we have set up a forum for us to have a dialogue about, the roles of fatherhood, to provide messages, to provide support to fathers, and to recognize their contributions for being in the lives of their sons and daughters.
Leslie, did you want to add anything?
Everything Bill said, I am head nodding over here. I'm in perfect agreement. And once again, as I mentioned, Rosalind Brewer, who's the CEO of Sam's Club, and Yvette Clark, a congressman out of New York. A lot of these men and women in the book, the reason we know about them is because their fathers pushed the heck out of them and loved them and encouraged them and really made them focus on education. So their dads may not have been famous or were just really in the trenches being fathers and husbands and hardworking men. And the reason we know about their kids today is because they were in their lives. So I just think that's a really important point.
Mm-hmm, they've been able to succeed. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Did your father influence you in a positive way? Give us a call and let's talk about it. Robert joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Robert. You're on the air.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would first like to thank you for even having me be able to talk. And I'd like
You're
to
welcome.
say that. Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Okay. I never met my father. He left my life when I was 2 years old. But there were a lot of male, uncles and the cousins that were available for me. But the biggest influence is really when I got saved and I got to know God, and I really got to know Him intimately on how the love was displayed to me from a spiritual sense, and it really helped me a lot in understanding my purpose and, getting to know me. And there was a lot of healing that needed to take place in my life because I think I was angry because I didn't know my father, and I've seen other boys that knew their father. So I believe God allowed me to be healed first for the absence of my father, but He loved me in the absence of my father. But then afterwards, I was able to take custody of my two nephews, and I was able to be somewhat of a father/uncle to them, and I was able to be to them what I desire my father to be to me because their fathers weren't in their lives. And so it was really helpful for me for the spiritual aspect, and then, like I say, having the word to help me to be a father/uncle figure to my nephews,
okay,
which are now successful as well.
I get your point, Robert, and we thank you for the call. And I want to ask you, Bill, because religion or faith, God played a role also as a theme through all of these stories, did it not?
Absolutely. And what I would say to Robert is, thank you for stepping in and being a positive role model for your nephews. I would often tell people that, just because your father wasn't in your life doesn't mean that you can't be or don't know how to be a good father yourself. Because if you did not have a positive experience with your father, then you already know just the opposite of what you need to do and deliver to your sons and daughters. And so I think the foremost important thing is you've got to have this desire to want to be in the lives of your sons and daughters. Mm-hmm. And so obviously in a number of these cases, and we talk about it, the role that faith has in guiding the men to be involved in the lives of the children.
Mm-hmm. And also,
if I can just add, Barbara, if you don't mind, Robert's point about not having his father in his life. I mean, his testimony is very powerful, and we have heard a lot of stories about, young men who have really struggled because their dads weren't in their lives and how they've been able to turn it around. As a daughter, just my personal story, my father was shot and killed when I was 13 years old, and it was a really tough time in the life of myself, my brother, my entire family. But, as Robert just mentioned, he's being an uncle, a father figure to his nephews. And I had a wonderful stepfather, my grandfather. I had uncles who were, we were just surrounded by love. And so sometimes when the men cannot be there, whether they die or whether they just choose not to be, it's just so wonderful to see other black men stepping up and really becoming father figures to our children, because that's what they need when the fathers are not present. And
Lance, why do you think that it is so hard for that story to be more prevalent than the story that we hear, that the dads are absent, that they're not taking care of their kids, that they're just making babies and leaving, all those negative stereotypes, this book will be a start, obviously, and a big help. But what do we need to do to really turn this conversation around?
I think what Bill and I have really tried to set out to do, just the point you just made, is changing that conversation and really looking at the media. I mean, journalists and radio personalities and people like yourself, Barbara, who have this sort of platform to talk about these powerful men and the role and responsibility in raising our children. I mean, I think it's about changing the conversation, engaging fathers, and really unearthing those stories that do exist. I mean, we're so quick to talk about who wasn't responsible, who didn't do what they were supposed to do, and this opportunity to really change that narrative is so important. So that's why I'm glad you have us on the show, and I'm glad that you're stepping up, and a lot of journalists are starting to look at what's going on in our society and all the real personal personal, poignant stories about these wonderful fathers doing their job every day. I mean, that's what's important, I think.
Mm-hmm. If you're just joining us, we're talking about fatherhood in the African American community with our guests, Leslie Gordon and Bill Middlebrooks, authors of Dare to be Extraordinary, a collection of positive life lessons from African American fathers. Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. No, what I wanted to add to what Leslie was saying is two things. One, again, our culture in America, as it relates to news, we focus on, the negative. You turn on the news and it's about what?
What's wrong?
Let's talk about the robberies. Let's talk about the rapes. Let's talk about the bankruptcies. Let's talk about, the celebrity, drinking and weed and all these other things. The stories that we're trying to talk about and the experiences that we are trying to talk about and engage people in, unfortunately, are not at, what I'll call top of list of the media. And so we've got to take the responsibility to put more effort and expect more and engage more, whether it's in our social organizations, whether it's in our churches, in our schools, about, this thing called fatherhood. And to your point about what do we need to do differently, one of the things that I'm doing here in Detroit is I'm working with a major social agency along with my brethren of the 100 Black Men of Greater Detroit, and also a major foundation. And we're looking to bring in 2014 an Extraordinary Fathers Academy here in Detroit, where we want to try and engage and teach men how to be better fathers and to have better outcomes with their sons and daughters. And so if we can get this, kicked off in 2014 and provide the kind of training, the kind of resources and support for men, and in some instances mothers, I think that we'll be moving forward and trying to, as they say, bend the curve.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. William joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, William. You're on the air.
Hello. You've touched on some of my comments already, but one thing that I would like to mention is that you all mentioned that it's important for a father to be present. I think it depends on the father, because in my case, although my father was a great guy and never, harmed anyone, never had a malicious bone in his body, he left my mom when I was an infant, and I think that I turned out much better as a person because he wasn't around, because he didn't have a strong work ethic. He was, not a good role model for a son growing up. Fortunately, I did have father figures in my life to take that role, and I also had a very strong mother who I attribute my success to. But I think it depends a lot on the father and not just having a father. I agree that, a strong family and an intact family are tickets to success, but it does depend on the father.
I couldn't agree more with you, William. And I think implicit in the perspective and the comments that Leslie and I are making is that, we are expecting that those fathers that are present have some skill sets and some positive attributes, characteristics that they can impart on their sons and daughters, and that we're hopeful that, part of the Extraordinary Fathers Academy that we're trying to bring here will provide some of those needed skill sets and tools and resources that men can draw upon to become better fathers. And,
I believe it was Dr. Ronald Goldsberry's story, I think, where he was talking about, because he didn't get to know his dad until he was an adult.
Right.
And towards the end of of his father's life, it was when he said it may not have been, his mother said it wasn't your father's fault. Is that right? Or am I mixing up stories?
You're good, Barbara. You are good. Hats off to you. Absolutely. He talked a lot. And just when Bill and I spent time with him, I mean, he had a lot of hurt. He shared very openly that was a real struggle throughout his formidable years, that his dad wasn't around. He wondered why. Was it my fault? And, it wasn't until he started to proactively reach out to him, first when he was to his father, first when he was in college, and then when he was a young adult, he started to take a more proactive approach to try to get to know his father. And, he found common ground with his dad as an adult. So his dad loved sports. He loved the Detroit Tigers and loved going to basketball games. So he would go to sporting events with him, and they eventually got to spend some time together. But to your point, it wasn't until his father really was in the hospital and very, very ill that they had a lot of quiet one-on-one time. He was able to really reconcile his feelings about why his dad wasn't there, and they just bridged the gap. And his father passed away, but when his father died, Ronald Goldsberry knew that he loved him and that they had a bond that was unbreakable. And so it took a long time for them to get there, but eventually they did. And there are a lot of young men and women who don't know their fathers as children, but when they get older and start to build relationships, or when the dad may come into their lives for reasons that maybe we don't even understand, sometimes the healing begins at that point. So it just really, it's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Bill.
And Barbara, it's important for people to understand when they get the book, which again is available at www.extraordinaryfathers.com, that the stories that we talk about, everybody wasn't a Cliff and Claire Huxtable experience.
Absolutely.
Right.
Not everybody, and we're not naive enough to say that, everybody has to grow up in a two-person home to be successful. We've got examples in the book where that wasn't, the case. But what was present was the influence, whether the father lived in the home or not. There was some kind of a relationship. There was some kind of lessons and experience and outreach that they had. And so, regardless of whether or not the father is living in the home or not, that doesn't necessarily prevent him from being in the lives of their children. Personal example: my parents divorced when I was a freshman in high school back in 1978. I use that date because there was, remember, no cell phones in
That's
78. Right. There were no emails. There was no Skype. But, my father talked to me darn near every day. I saw him at least 3 weekends out of the month and staying with him. So, the fact that, he didn't live with me while I was in high school, I tell many people I still had the feeling that my father was always there and present in my life. And never once did my mother or father, who had their own issues and difficulties, never once did they put me in between their issues. Never once did my mother denigrate my father in front of me, and vice versa. And so, even today, if you're not living with your child's, mother or father, that doesn't mean that you can't be present in their life, and it doesn't mean that the mother and the father can't be civil to one another in the eyes of their children. It's not the child's fault that you're not together, and don't make him or her, the
scapegoat,
feel the burden of the animosity and the negative emotions and feelings that could exist between the two of you. Mm-hmm. Your responsibility is that child.
Our phones are lit up, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Keith joins us from Newport News. Keith,
Hello?
You're on the air. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, how you doing?
Okay, how are you?
I'm enjoying the conversation you have. I hear it often in the media, but the one thing that never gets discussed is maybe some of the reasons why the father may not be there. It may not always be his choice not to be there. That there are obstacles placed in his way. The other side of the family may not like him for one reason or another, and then there's the issue of like child custody and child support. All these things play into this.
Keith, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Though, are you a dad?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So do you think that, because as Bill was just talking about, regardless of what the circumstances may be between the mother and the father, that you could still create a relationship with your children? Do you have a relationship with your kids?
Yeah. Yes, I do. But it takes two to build a relationship. One person can want the relationship. The other person may not want the relationship. And so from there, you can see where it'll go. Mm-hmm. As I said, the reasons why they aren't there are never discussed. I talk to a lot of people, adults or whatever, and many people, more than I can imagine, but they most times have negative feelings about their fathers. The father left the mother, whatever, this and that. I always tell them, you were a baby, you were a child at the time, you don't know what was going on between the parents. I just try to give a positive view of a father any chance I get.
Okay.
Like in the media, for instance, every message you get from the media, except for one I can think of. I just started the other day, the TV show Everybody Hates Chris. That's a pretty decent portrayal of a father. He's a positive character.
Great. Keith, thank
else,
you.
Pretty much you see, just like in music, Papa was a Rolling Stone, for instance.
Got you. Keith, we gotta cut you off because we got a lot of calls coming, but we got your point that we've got to change the narrative, which is why we're holding this conversation. Daryl joins us from Newport News. Hi, Daryl. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. I'm enjoying the program.
Thank you.
I have to be the counterweight to much of what y'all have said. Illegitimacy in the African American community has widely been estimated at around 70%. And it's an epidemic. And I'm all for celebrating, exceptional fathers, and that's all well and good, but you're not focusing on the problem. That's basically my story. I think you're celebrating one thing when you should be talking about the other.
Well, the point is that we do talk about the other quite a bit, but I'm going to let my guests respond to that. Leslie, you want to start?
You know what? I'd love to have Bill talk about this because he has some great statistics that he often shares. Bill, do you mind?
Yeah, fantastic. Bill?
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective, but let me first say that, the word illegitimate, a child is not illegitimate. A child is a child. Now, the fact of whether or not the child is born to a mother and father that are married, that's what I'll call a technical term. And I agree with you that we have too many children that are born out of wedlock, but that doesn't make them illegitimate. That's my first point. The second point is, whether, again, in today's culture, whether you're married to the child's mother or not, does not and should not preclude you or prevent you from being a father and actively involved and engaged in the life of that child. Now, again, it does take two. You do have to have a mother and a father who are committed to raising that child regardless of their circumstances. But I would tell you that, statistics say that, children that don't have a father in their life, particularly for females, are 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen. And so we need to have more dialogue and discussion with our children about the importance of marriage, about the importance of fatherhood, the importance of motherhood, and what it means to raise a child, just as we want to talk to them about, how to balance a checkbook, how to, be respectful, how to stay away from drugs and how to, follow, a path in education. we need to be having discussions with children, I think, in a grade school level about what it means to be a responsible parent. And not enough of that discussion is going on within our community.
Parenthood is that one thing that does not come with a manual, correct?
Absolutely.
Right.
Anything you want to add, Leslie?
I just want to say, the message that I often try to share with women, I mean, the good point was raised about mothers sometimes, for whatever reason, not allowing the fathers to play a role in their children's lives. And I just I try to appeal to women and say that, for whatever reason, if the father doesn't have if she doesn't have a good relationship with the father of her children, I just ask that you also try to do the right thing and remember that this is about the children. This is about our babies. I mean, we have to put everything, not everything, but we have to put some things aside and do everything within our power to make sure our children are whole. And that means allowing the father to see his children in a safe environment, of course, and supporting him in developing a real relationship with the child. We need the love and support of our African-American fathers, and we need to help our children develop strong relationships with their dads. At the end of the day, our children need their fathers.
Okay.
And,
Sydney,
and Barbara,
go ahead. Mm-hmm.
There is no federal program. There's no white knight that's coming to our communities to fix this issue. It's our issue. They're our children. It's our responsibility. And if we're going to make a positive impact and raise extraordinary sons and daughters, we got to do it regardless of, what our economic situation is. Values come to people not based upon, the dollar or W-2 that you get on an annual basis. They come in terms of the experiences and the perspectives that parents, instill in their sons and daughters. And we need more of that.
We've got one more call I want to try to get in before we have to end the conversation. Sydney joins us from Hampton. Hi, Sydney. You're on the air.
Hello, Robert. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Sure.
What a conversation. I'm broken and overwhelmed, and there's so much that I could say, but I do want to say, speaking to a gentleman that just called a moment ago, character is so important when you look at developing fatherhood. And unfortunately, a lot of times we deal with the fruit and we don't address the root. And I think that's one of the things that the gentleman was trying to infer to some degree. But it is a sad testimony, culturally speaking, that many times as black men, we have missed out on the opportunity to develop character. Having a child does not make us a father. And unfortunately, we see ourselves sometimes defeated in the area of being a father because we are either too immature, our thinking processes haven't developed to the extent that we have the life skills or whatever the case may be, our own inadequacies, selfishness or whatever the case may be. But I think developing the character of a man speaks volumes to the type of father he's going to become. I was listening to a lot of the testimonies. Man, those fathers of some of those people that you have written about had some wonderful character, and it's a blessing.
Sydney, I'm going to have to cut you off only because we've got less than 5 minutes, and I want to give them a chance to respond to you. Thank you so much for your phone call. Bill?
There's no question. Character is key, and I'll reference as an example of a lack of character. I think there was a couple of weeks ago, there was a YouTube video surfacing or going around where maybe it was an 18-month, 24-month-old child in diapers, African-American, that was being goaded and pushed into and celebrated for cursing and using the N-word and the B-word and the F-U and that. That's a lack of character. And, instead of celebrating those kinds of things in our community, we need to come out strong and let people know that kind of character or lack of character is not what's going to get our children to the level that they need to be in order to compete and live an extraordinary life.
Okay, we're down to our last 3 minutes of the show, and what I'd like to do first is say to our callers, we won't be able to get you on the air, but please feel free to go to our Facebook page and express your comments there, and I'm sure I can get Bill and Leslie to take a look and perhaps respond. So thank you for that. I want to start with you, Leslie. I'd like to have you leave some lessons for dads that you learned from this experience of writing this book. And Bill, I will ask you the same question after Leslie finishes.
Barbara, I think, the biggest lessons, again, are about a father being present. And then those who are not present, I just have to turn the conversation just to moms for a second. I mean, we had some extraordinary mothers. Ilyasa Shabazz, a daughter of Malcolm X, was featured in our book, and she didn't get to know her father. Her father was shot and killed when she was just 3 or 4 years old, and her mother stepped in and made sure her father's presence as a dad, not as the public figure Malcolm X, but as a husband and father, was very present. And so the moms in our lives need to also foster this positive relationship between fathers and their children, and even when the fathers are not there, need to make sure that they're being represented properly. I mean, really, it's about their presence. It's about the love that the fathers can provide. It's about the whole family in any way, shape, or form that it takes place these days to make sure that children are whole and that they're loved and that they're encouraged to do their absolute best in life.
Fantastic. And Bill, what would you say?
I'd say a couple things.
You got 1 minute. You have less than a minute, actually.
Sure. Continue the conversation. Reach us on Facebook at Extraordinary Fathers. Reach us on our website at www.extraordinaryfathers.com. We can continue this dialogue, support what we're trying to do. 25% of all the profits for this book goes to charities that are represented by those 20 individuals that are profiled in the book. And if you're going to be a father, teach your sons and daughters the concept of pride in everything that they do.
Thank you so much.
Got personal responsibility in delivering excellence.
That's Leslie Gordon and Bill Middlebrooks, authors of Dare to Be Extraordinary, a collection of positive life lessons from African American fathers. And we so thank you for being a guest on Another View today. And we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Claude McKnight of Group Take 6, and you're listening to Another View, Fridays at noon at WHRV 89.5 FM.
And welcome back. If you're someone who loves a good book, you probably already know how literary works can shape our lives. Well, the U.S. Department of Labor has taken on a project that chronologically tells the story of African Americans and our contributions to America's workforce. And it's all done through the eyes of literature. It's called Books That Shaped Work in America. Our Lisa Godley gives us a sneak peek and tells us how you can contribute to this fascinating historic perspective.
The Books That Shaped Work in America project is a wonderful way to look at how literature has impacted our lives, particularly when it comes to things like innovation, workplace safety, and work ethic. For example, Department of Labor's Women's Bureau Director, Latifah Lyles, points to Unbought and Unbossed as an inspiring work. This book details Shirley Chisholm's rise from a child in Brooklyn to the nation's first African-American congresswoman.
Blacks and women are still struggling to gain equitability of opportunity across the board.
After Mrs. Chisholm was assigned to the Forestry Committee, she asked the House Speaker for more relevant assignment. He responded that she needed to be a good soldier and could possibly be reassigned later. So the quote was, "If you do not assist me, I will have to do my own thing." The Speaker was startled for the first time. "Your what?" "It means I will do what I have to do, regardless of the consequences. Doing your own thing means that if you have strong feelings about something, you do it.
Lyles calls Chisholm someone who really paved a path.
He talks a little bit about her as a person, her conviction, and she was just brave beyond a lot of her colleagues and counterparts.
Unbought and Unbossed is on the list, along with other literary works that have influenced how we view work, the workplace, and the laborers who make it all happen. The Department of Labor's Senior Advisor for Public Affairs, Carl Felicio, says some of the recommendations have come from present and past labor secretaries.
Former Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman put a book on her list, Open Wide the Freedom Gates, which was an autobiography of Dorothy Height.
If you prepare yourself, you can progress. And I think that's, to me, those are words that I heard back in my youth in my own home. But I think we can all now say that more loudly and clearly to young people and give them a new sense of hope.
And what I found interesting was it wasn't just the way Secretary Herman looked at it wasn't just her autobiography, but for a lot of women, it could be a how-to to navigate a workplace.
Felicio says one of the list's most popular books is The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass.
And it basically is his personal memoir in which he recounts his years as a slave in Maryland and his escape to the North and to freedom. And it certainly influenced the anti-slavery movement. And it basically recounts how slavery is part of America's work history.
The Department of Labor is asking the general public to get involved in this ongoing project by adding your choices.
Like American work and workplaces, this list is constantly evolving, constantly growing, constantly changing, and we're really asking people to contribute their ideas by going to dol.gov/books and looking at the list, seeing what books are already on it, what titles we've already listed, but to add their own suggestions as well. We're happy to consider more additions to the list.
While the Frederick Douglass narrative is one of the earliest books on the list, written in 1845, one of the latest is the 2009 bestseller, The Help.
The Help. There's a marvelous quote in that goes like this. Wasn't that the point of the book? For women to realize we are just two people? Not that much separates us. Not nearly as much as I thought.
Felicio calls the Books That Shaped Work in America project a great way to look at the history of work through the lens of various people. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And if you'd like to be a part of the Books That Shaped Work in America project, you can contribute your ideas by logging on to dol.gov/books. February is Black History Month, so I thought I'd leave you today with this Black History moment. On February 1st, 1960, 4 brave freshman students attending North Carolina A&T State University changed the course of history by taking a seat at the segregated lunch counter at F.W. Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were refused service and sat peacefully until the store closed. The next day, they returned, this time with 25 more students. By the end of February, there were sit-ins all across the South, inspired by the courage of Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond. In July of that year, Woolworths integrated its lunch counter. Black history, it's America's history. And that's our show for today. Next Friday is Valentine's Day, and it's also time for the Roundtable. Our theme music was composed and produced by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Denise Norris answered our phones. Thanks for listening, everyone, and let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.